I am Dracula.
The 1931 Dracula didn't just launch Bela Lugosi into legend, it reshaped horror forever. But behind the camera, the production was stranger than anything audiences saw on screen. Lost films, missing epilogues, bizarre animals lurking in castle hallways, and an actor so committed he was ultimately buried in his Dracula cape. What started as a low-budget gamble became the birthplace of the entire Universal Monsters era. Today, we're diving into 20 weird and disturbing facts about one of the most influential horror films ever made.
Don't kill me! Let me live, please! Punish me, torture me, but let me live!
Fact 1. Bela Lugosi was not Universal's first choice. Before Lugosi ever stepped into the cape, Universal planned for Lon Chaney, the man of 1,000 faces, to star as Dracula. When Chaney died unexpectedly in 1930, the studio scrambled for replacements, considering major talents like Conrad Veidt and John Carradine. Lugosi, meanwhile, wasn't even on the list. He was a stage actor with limited English and no major film fame. But his persistence and his willingness to work for far less money than a star of Chaney's caliber eventually won him the role. What seemed like a compromised decision became iconic, proving the perfect Dracula wasn't the one Universal wanted, but the one it accidentally discovered. If Chaney had lived, we might have had a completely different version of cinematic vampires. Instead, Lugosi's aristocratic, hypnotic take redefined the character. That twist of fate didn't just change one casting choice, it altered the trajectory of horror history.
This morning when I arrived. Thanks, I'm feeling much better.
Fact 2. Lugosi had already performed Dracula 1,000 times. By the time filming began, Lugosi wasn't learning Dracula, he was repeating him. He had starred in the Broadway production starting in 1927 and toured the country extensively, performing the role so many times that he later estimated he had played the count roughly 1,000 times. His slow movements, hypnotic stare, and elegant posture were all perfected on stage years before cameras rolled. This deep familiarity gave his film performance a dreamlike confidence that helped define the cinematic vampire for generations, turning Dracula from a monster into a mysterious, seductive presence audiences had never seen before. He didn't just act the role, he embodied it with a precision honed night after night before live audiences. That stage background also explains why his performance feels so theatrical and deliberate on screen. What some might call stiff, others recognize as a carefully crafted persona that had already terrified thousands of theatergoers before it ever hit celluloid. Fact 3. Lugosi was paid shockingly little. Despite giving the movie its identity, Lugosi was paid only $500 a week for 7 weeks, far below what his co-star David Manners earned. Because Lugosi was desperate to reprise the role, Universal used that enthusiasm to lowball him. The film made him immortal, but not wealthy. Instead, the low pay reinforced a pattern that followed him for the rest of his career, where he was underpaid, typecast, and financially insecure. Still, Lugosi considered the role too important to refuse, accepting a fraction of what he deserved in exchange for everlasting fame. That decision haunted him later as he struggled to find varied work outside of horror. While the studio profited enormously from the film and its legacy, Lugosi spent many of his later years fighting declining roles and money problems. His story is a sobering reminder that iconic status doesn't always come with a matching bank account. Fact 4. Dracula has almost no musical score. Unlike later horror films filled with swelling orchestras, Dracula is nearly silent. Universal didn't want to spend money on an original score, so the film features only 2 pre-existing classical pieces, Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake in the opening credits and Wagner's Die Meistersinger during the opera scene. The result is an eerie stillness that unsettles viewers even today. Every echo, footstep, and moment of silence becomes amplified, creating a dreamlike atmosphere that feels both theatrical and uncanny, a tone that might never have existed if the studio had invested in a traditional soundtrack. Viewers are forced to sit with the quiet, which makes Lugosi's voice and presence even more commanding. That silence separates Dracula from the heavily scored horror films that followed and gives it a uniquely haunted quality. In trying to save money, Universal accidentally created one of the most haunting soundscapes in horror. Fact 5. 3 versions were filmed at the same time. While Tod Browning shot the English version during the day, a second team filmed a full Spanish-language version at night using the same sets. Directed by George Melford and starring Carlos Villarreal, the Spanish version is longer, more expressive, and in some ways more technically impressive. Universal also produced a third silent version with intertitles for theaters not yet equipped for sound. This unusual triple production approach was purely practical, stretching resources as far as possible, but it created one of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes stories in early horror history. The idea of making multiple versions for different markets shows how uncertain studios were about the future of sound. It also gave Dracula a strange cinematic twin living in another language and performance style. Together, these versions show how flexible and experimental early 1930s filmmaking truly was. Fact 6. The Spanish version was lost and then rediscovered. For decades, the Spanish Dracula was considered lost, surviving only in scraps and still photographs. A badly damaged print surfaced in the 1970s, missing large sections due to nitrate decay. Then, in the early 1990s, archivists found a nearly pristine copy in Cuba, a miracle given how many early films had already decomposed beyond recovery. Once restored, it stunned horror fans. Many now argue it surpasses the English version in cinematography and emotional intensity. A lost film became a celebrated companion to the original, preserved by pure luck half a world away. Its rediscovery also highlighted how fragile early cinema truly is. Without chance, timing, and dedicated archivists, entire chapters of film history can simply disappear. The Spanish Dracula stands as both a triumph and a warning about what else might already be gone. Fact 7. Bela Lugosi never wore fangs. Modern vampires rely on sharp fangs, but Lugosi never wore any. Early makeup effects couldn't convincingly create them, and censors were already wary of the film's sensual undertones. Instead, Lugosi conveyed menace through his stare, subtle movements, and the eerie ritual of leaning toward a victim's neck. This absence of fangs helped give his Dracula a haunting, aristocratic quality that later adaptations struggled to replicate. It proved that horror didn't need visible teeth, just the suggestion of danger wrapped in elegance. His performance showed that terror could come from posture, voice, and implication rather than graphic imagery. Later, when fangs became standard, they added a different kind of shock, but none quite erased the power of Lugosi's silent, unseen bite. Fact 8. The castle's animals made no sense. Castle Dracula is filled with creatures that don't belong in Transylvania. Armadillos, opossums, and even Jerusalem crickets native to California Universal simply used whatever animals they had available. Armadillos appeared because someone at the studio believed they dug into coffins and ate corpses, a completely false rumor that somehow made it into the film. These creatures gave the castle an uncanny, surreal feeling that audiences couldn't quite explain. Adding to the film's weird dream logic, they make the environment feel subtly wrong, like a nightmare that doesn't follow the rules of reality. The animals may not be accurate, but they add a layer of strangeness that suits Dracula's world. What started as a lazy practical choice ended up making the film even more unsettling. Fact 9. The original epilogue warned viewers that vampires were real. When Dracula premiered, it originally ended with actor Edward Van Sloan stepping onto the screen to warn audiences that vampires truly exist. The epilogue mimicked the stage play's tradition, giving viewers one final shiver as Van Sloan broke the fourth wall to remind them they were never completely safe. But when the film was re-released in 1936 under strict production code rules, the speech was removed for being too superstitious and potentially offensive to religious groups. Tragically, no known copy survives. Studio archivists have searched for decades, turning up nothing but still photographs referencing its existence. Many horror historians consider this lost epilogue one of the great missing pieces of early cinema, an eerie reminder that Dracula once intended to send audiences home genuinely looking over their shoulders. If it ever resurfaced, it would be one of the most significant horror rediscoveries of all time. Until then, it lives only in secondhand descriptions and imagination. Fact 10. Universal recycled Dracula's sets for years. Universal reused Dracula's castle and Carfax Abbey sets extensively throughout the 1930s, saving money by repurposing Gothic staircases, hallways, and stone interiors for other horror films. Even the Royal Albert Hall scene in Dracula was shot on leftover sets from The Phantom of the Opera, 1925, giving the film an unexpectedly grand atmosphere for its budget. These recycled structures became the visual DNA of early Universal horror, creating a consistent Gothic style across multiple films. Because the sets were so distinctive, fans can often spot familiar backgrounds in other classics if they look closely. Their reappearance turned Universal's monster movies into an interconnected visual world long before shared cinematic universes were popular. The walls and arches of Dracula quietly haunted other films, linking them in ways audiences might not consciously notice. Fact 11. Audience members fainted at the premiere. At Dracula's 1931 premiere at the Roxy Theater, newspapers claimed viewers fainted during the show. Whether it was genuine fear or clever studio publicity, the story spread quickly, making audiences eager to test their nerve. The film sold 50,000 tickets in 48 hours, a staggering number during the Depression. Some moviegoers described the experience as unlike anything they'd encountered. A horrifying blend of uncanny silence, Lugosi's hypnotic stare, and a villain who seemed more seductive than monstrous. Universal rode this wave of hysteria, using the fainting rumors and advertisements to draw even bigger crowds. It proved that fear, real or exaggerated, could be one of Hollywood's most powerful marketing tools, and it cemented Dracula's reputation as a film that didn't just entertain, it overwhelmed. Fact 12. Lugosi became a U.S. citizen because of the film. Just months after Dracula's release, Bela Lugosi became a naturalized U.S. citizen on June 26, 1931. The film gave him national recognition and a sense of stability after years spent drifting through Europe during political upheaval. For Lugosi, success in Hollywood wasn't just financial, it represented belonging. Becoming a citizen solidified his identity at a time when his fame was skyrocketing. And even though typecasting plagued him in later decades, Lugosi always regarded Dracula as his gateway to a new life, both professionally and personally. His citizenship ceremony became a defining moment that tied his fate permanently to American cinema. It's a poignant contrast. The man who played a foreign invader on screen was, in real life, fighting to fully belong. Fact 13. The phonetic lines myth is false. A persistent myth claims Lugosi learned his lines phonetically because he barely spoke English. In reality, he had been living in the U.S. for nearly a decade and had performed extensively in English-language stage productions. His unusual delivery in the film came from a combination of his thick accent, his classical European training, and his highly theatrical approach to the role. Over time, this created the illusion that he was simply repeating sounds rather than speaking naturally. The myth stuck because it fit a certain narrative about foreign actors in early Hollywood. But Lugosi understood every word he spoke and intentionally crafted each line to sound hypnotic and unsettling. His cadence became a defining element of the Dracula mythos. The rumor says more about Hollywood's bias than about Lugosi's talent. Fact 14. The film features real Hungarian dialogue. In the film's opening village scenes, the peasants speak authentic Hungarian and even recite a Hungarian version of the Lord's Prayer. Universal cast Hungarian-speaking extras without realizing how authentic their conversations would sound to American audiences. Their presence gave the film a surprising cultural grounding that horror movies rarely attempted in the early 1930s. The foreign dialogue added tension, making the village feel ancient, insular, and steeped in superstition. For Lugosi, himself Hungarian, hearing his native language echo across the set created an accidental but powerful connection between his real heritage and his most iconic role. It's one of the film's most subtle yet atmospheric touches. That authenticity at the beginning helps sell the supernatural horror that follows. Fact 15. Edward Van Sloan hated the film. Edward Van Sloan's measured performance as Van Helsing became the template for nearly every vampire hunter in cinema. Yet privately, he disliked Dracula and once described it as overplayed, overwritten, altogether lousy. He viewed Browning's restrained direction and theatrical staging as outdated even for 1931. But despite his criticism, Van Sloan's intensity and authority anchored the more melodramatic performances around him. His presence helped elevate the film beyond its limitations, giving it the gravitas it needed to become a horror classic. Ironically, the film he dismissed became one of the defining roles of his career, outlasting nearly everything else he did. It's a reminder that actors don't always recognize the lasting power of the projects they're in. Fact 16. David Manners never watched the movie again. David Manners, who played Jonathan Harker, insisted he never watched Dracula again after making it. He found studio filmmaking uninspiring and saw acting more as a paycheck than a craft. Manners was known for retiring from Hollywood early to pursue a quieter life in art and writing, distancing himself from the industry that had made him recognizable. Yet his performance remains a permanent part of horror history, preserved in endless re-releases, restorations, and archival screenings. His lack of interest created a fascinating contrast. While fans celebrated the film for decades, one of its stars simply walked away from it forever. To him, it was just another job, but to audiences, it was a defining piece of horror cinema. That distance only adds another layer of strangeness to the film's legacy. Fact 17. The film was cut down by censors. When Dracula was re-released in 1936, the production code demanded several deletions, reducing the film's length from 85 to about 75 minutes. Scenes involving Renfield's disturbing behavior and implied violence were deemed too extreme. The removed footage wasn't archived and is now believed permanently lost, a common fate for censored scenes of the era. As a result, modern audiences unknowingly watch a slightly tamer version of the film than those who saw it in 1931. These irreversible cuts add a layer of mystery to Dracula, leaving historians to wonder how much darker the original version truly was. Every missing moment becomes another ghost haunting the film's reputation. It's possible that the most unsettling parts of Dracula are the ones no one will ever see again. Fact 18. Philip Glass composed a new score in 1998. In 1998, Philip Glass reimagined Dracula with an entirely new score performed by the Kronos Quartet. The atmospheric soundtrack gave the film a modern, rhythmic energy, transforming silent stretches into emotional crescendos. Reactions were divided. Some felt it deepened the storytelling, while others argued it disrupted the film's iconic quiet. But the project highlighted how flexible early cinema can be, functioning almost like a silent film where music reshapes the mood entirely. Glass's score remains a unique experiment, a modern reinterpretation layered over a nearly 70-year-old masterpiece. It effectively created two parallel versions of Dracula, one defined by silence, the other by constant sound. Viewers can choose which version feels more haunting. Fact 19. Lugosi was buried in his Dracula cape. When Bela Lugosi died in 1956, his family honored his request to be buried in his Dracula cape. The gesture reflected his deep attachment to the role, one he had played on stage and screen for decades. Though typecasting haunted his career, he embraced Dracula as a defining part of his identity. The image of Lugosi laid to rest in full vampire regalia became an enduring symbol of horror history. His burial blurred the line between performer and character, turning the Count not just into a role, but into Lugosi's final lasting legacy. It's hard to imagine a more fitting ending for the man who brought the most famous vampire in history to life. Even in death, he remained under the shadow of the cape. Fact 20. Dracula launched the Universal Monsters era. The success of Dracula saved Universal during a financially uncertain period and directly inspired the studio to produce Frankenstein later that same year. These two hits ignited the legendary Universal Monsters franchise, leading to The Mummy, The Invisible Man, Bride of Frankenstein, and The Wolf Man. Together, they shaped the look, tone, and mythology of early American horror cinema. Dracula proved audiences were hungry for the macabre, and studios realized horror could be both profitable and prestigious. Without Lugosi's performance and the film's breakout success, the golden age of movie monsters might never have happened. The entire concept of the movie monster, as we know it today, can be traced back to that single capped figure walking down a staircase and saying, "I am Dracula." Dracula, 1931, wasn't just a horror film. It was a strange, chaotic, groundbreaking experiment that changed cinema forever. From lost footage and rediscovered films to underpaid actors and recycled castle sets, its legacy is built on creativity, accidents, and pure atmosphere. If you enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments. Which universal monster should we explore next?